What time do you say?
In 30 minutes.
30 minutes. Okay. We should run. Okay. I thought we had 1 hour. I didn't. Okay.
If we need more, maybe we can come back and do it another. Okay.
Let's start right away. Governments all over the world are spending as if there was tomorrow, no? Public debt notwithstanding. Apparently, there has never been a better moment for modern monetary theory. Did you need a pandemic to become mainstream?
No, I don't think so, but it did not hurt to have what you just described, which is, governments, as you said, around the world, stepping up and committing enormous sums of money. Now, something like 11 trillion has been committed globally, and we're not done, right? The UK has come in with another package. Here in the US, we are struggling to get our act together, but presumably there will be more at some point. And so, you say, well, in 2019, the conversation was very much about unsustainable fiscal paths and unsustainable government finance and the need to rein in deficits and debt, and then all out the window. So, there is something fortuitous about the timing here in that MMT, I think, allows us to understand exactly how it's possible that governments are responding like this in this moment.
Yeah, still, you will need, I'm afraid, to overcome a couple of cultural obstacles, not small one. Because since we were kids, we have been raised with a very simple and straightforward economic pillar, which is you shouldn't spend more than you get, okay? More money than you make. Why? Can you explain to us why that holds true for a family but doesn't apply for a government?
Well, for a currency issuing government.
Yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, in a very real sense, the economy is powered by spending. Capitalism runs on sales, right? And so for the economy to function well, you need robust spending, let us say. And since some people will want to spend less than their full income, in other words, there's a desire to save, right? Households like to save a bit. In particular, the only way the output gets sold is if someone else spends more than their income. So you can't make spending the enemy in an economy that is driven by sales. So given that, in economic language or jargon, we would talk about demand leakages. Given the demand leakages, somebody has to spend more than their income. So the question is, who should that be? Who should that be? Should it be the currency users, or should it be the currency issuer? Who is in a safer position over time to run their budget in a way that results in spending more than you take in? Households can do it. They can do it. It involves borrowing, which means households draw down their savings or take on debt. And for households, they're taking on debt in a currency that they can't create. They have to pay it back somehow. And paying it back means, being able to earn enough currency to service that debt. Currency issuing governments don't face that financial constraint that households face. So there can never be a solvency constraint, right? Where a household can go bankrupt, can run out of money, literally run out of money. A sovereign government, a government with a sovereign currency, I should say, cannot.
you've been an advisor with Bernie Sanders for a long time, but in the book, at a certain point, you critique the fact that in a way, he was victim himself of the kind of trope which says we shouldn't put the burden of our debt on the future generation. How do you, once again, how is that possible? Creating debt without putting debt on the next generation shoulders?
Well, I guess for, the basic difference between my way of thinking and the conventional way of thinking is that I really do not view the government bonds, the securities, as debt. I think the problem is the term is a problem in the sense that it gets us thinking about household debt, about credit card debt, which is why in the book I also quote President Barack Obama. And I say, when Obama was running for president, he was out, stumping, giving speeches across the country. And he said, you take out a credit card from the Bank of China in the name of our children that we are going to have to pay back. He said, it's unpatriotic, right? It's irresponsible, he said. It's unpatriotic. Now, this man became president, right? But he's comparing the national debt to credit card debt. And what I'm suggesting is that essentially what the government is doing is choosing to make some of its payments in the form of cash. In the book, I call them green dollars.
Yes.
Some of its payments in the form of securities, of treasuries, of yellow dollars. But if you view those yellow dollars as a form of payment, then it becomes clear, well, what exactly is there to pay back, right? You have the option to make payment with two different instruments, and you are the issuer of both. The US dollar can only come from the US government. It can't come from anywhere else. We're talking about the currency. And US treasuries can only be issued by the US government. Can't come from anywhere else. So the government gets to choose, which instrument do I want you to hold as I make my payments, right? So when the bond matures, it just turns back into a green dollar, right? The government's obligation to a bondholder is only to make payments in that other monetary instrument. It's the issuer of both. So the idea about this burdening next generation, we're just simply talking about shifting funds from one account at the Fed to another account at the Fed, and not forget that all of those treasury bonds are part of our wealth. Whoever holds them, they're one of your assets. It's not your liability. They talk to us about them as though we owe, your share of the national debt. You're on the hook for this. You have no. This is part of our savings, part of our wealth.
Yeah. Still, you admit that one limit still is the inflation, but in reality, when was the last time that inflation kicked in a significant way?
Well, it's been a long time. I mean, the last time the U.S. experienced what most people here who are old enough to remember it would call, problematic high levels of inflation was in the 1970s.
Exactly. Yeah. So do you think that it's more a theoretical threat rather than a current threat?
No, I mean, I don't think I would go quite that far. I think that, what the experience of the 1970s teaches us, is that you can get elevated or even very high inflation for reasons that have nothing to do with the government's fiscal balance or with how close you're running your economy to full employment. Because in the 1970s, of course, that inflation happened alongside very high levels of unemployment, which means we didn't have a government that was aggressively trying to push the economy to run too fast. We had lots of slack in the economy, high levels of unemployment, but we got inflation anyway. And so did countries around the world. Why? Well, because a lot was going on at the time. We had the Vietnam War in the 60s and then 2 oil price shocks, very different structure of, labor contracts with a much more unionized workforce and a lot of wages, worker wages that were tied to inflation, and you had some wage price dynamics happening there as well. But the oil price shocks were clearly a key driver of high inflation at that time. And so you can always have a surprise event on the supply side, a disruption in prices that happens in countries that, depend heavily on agriculture for exports, collapse in agricultural prices, or a high, spike, a crop failure, something that sends, food prices soaring. That stuff can get passed through in the form of inflation. So things can happen, right? I mean, if we allowed the coronavirus pandemic to bankrupt 50% of all the companies and businesses in the economy, that would be a major supply side event, right? You'd lose that productive capacity. And if you didn't recover it quickly, you'd lose it potentially for good. And if you were trying to support everyone's income while the productive capacity was being decimated, you could get inflation.
And in that case, you would use taxes?
Well, so this is the thing. And it's a problem that people have described MMT as saying that you use taxes to fight inflation, because that's not what MMT says. So what I've been telling people, and I think I hope it's helpful, is, in my home, I have a basement. If I go downstairs after we finish talking here and I find that with water, I say, geez, I got a problem, right? I got all this water in my basement, but I don't know exactly what to do to fix the problem because I don't know where the water's coming from. So I say, maybe one of my kids left a faucet running, maybe a toilet overflowed, maybe a pipe burst, maybe the dishwasher's leaking. I have to find the source of the problem before I know how to address it. And I think the same is true of inflation. So think about the way we fight inflation today. Central banks are given responsibility. Say, this is your problem. You're the central bank, you fix it. And how do central banks fight inflation? Well, they raise interest rates. They have a one-size-fits-all response to inflationary pressure. They just raise the interest rate thinking, well, that'll fix it. Well, that's like me running to one bathroom in the house and checking the faucet. And if it's not running, I say, oh, well, I tightened it up, but I didn't fix the problem. So MMT, I think, has a much more nuanced and sophisticated way of thinking about inflation, right? And I do this in the book, and other MMT scholars have written about this as well. To deal with inflationary pressures, you have to identify the source of the inflationary pressure. So, for example, think back to the 70s. We were just talking about the 1970s, and Paul Volcker was chairman of the Federal Reserve. And Volcker allowed interest rates to go very, very high. And people believe, I think the majority of economists believe, that Paul Volcker ultimately beat inflation, that he punched its lights out because interest rates went high enough that eventually Volcker was able to break the back of inflation. Now, there are other arguments, and MMT economists have made them. And there is, I think, a very strong case to be made that, in fact, President Jimmy Carter ought to be given, if not, credit, much of the credit for breaking the back of inflation, because he deregulated the natural gas industry. And by doing that, he made natural gas cost competitive. And that meant that OPEC, right, had much less power to maintain high oil prices. And so you see, you can fight inflation through something like deregulating a competitive market or something. I could give lots of other examples, but if healthcare costs are spiking and that drives headline inflation higher, you don't want the Fed raising interest rates to fight inflation that's being driven by private health insurance companies raising healthcare premiums. That's not going to help, bring down inflation, but you also wouldn't want to raise taxes to fight that kind of inflationary pressure. What you want is a single payer healthcare system that creates the competitive, right? Public option, something like that. So.
Yeah. It makes perfect sense, of course. Since you quoted it before, one very seducing piece of MMT is a federal guaranteed job, no? Which sounds very Keynesian. And how would it work? I mean, because I've read, of course, you've got your share of critics on the Financial Times. I've read, doing my homework here, I found some people said that wouldn't change a thing because it's only a very low-paid job that wouldn't be competitive with those who get $30 per hour. How would that work according to you? I mean, the federal guarantee job.
Okay, so I did co-author a report called "Public Service Employment: A Path to Public Service Employment, a Path to Full Employment," something like that, through the Levy Institute, with other MMT economists, and one of them is Pavlina Chernova, and she published a book shortly after my book came out, and her book is The Case for a Federal Job Guarantee. So, she does in that book much more than I can do in this limited time here. And of course, there are people who propose a job guarantee that deal with the question you just asked. Well, what if you were making $30 an hour, but the replacement option is half that much, $15 an hour? Okay, there are people who say, well, you could make it 30 for people who lose a $30. But what we've always done is proposed a base wage and benefit package. So there's a compensation package. It includes healthcare and paid time off and $15 an hour. And so we consider it, a living wage package of, salary, wage, and benefits. And so how would it work? It's like a public option in the labor market, which means anyone in the economy who wants to work but can't find a job anywhere, there is no work for me and I want to work. This program says there is a job for you, right? So what the federal government does is commit to providing the financing. So it's federally funded, but the program itself is locally administered. And we think this is really important because, the federal government, it's not some top-down, bureaucratic, the federal government will tell each person who's out of work, this is what you will go do with your time, to earn this wage. It's the people who are living in the communities who will benefit from the work that's done, who ought to have primary say in terms of shaping the kinds of jobs. So broadly speaking, we think of these jobs as being part of building a care economy, where the work that's done would involve caring for people, caring for the community, and caring for the planet. So it is part of a strategy to also address the effects of climate change, right? But elder care, child care, so a care economy. And the people living in the communities propose the jobs. They get approved up through the local, state, and they have to be compatible with the guidelines laid out at the federal level. But it establishes a base minimum for the economy as a whole, so that anyone in the economy always has a right to take employment in the public service program at that basic wage. And it's a counter-cyclical program, which means when the economy is weak, when the bottom is falling out, instead of allowing millions of people to become unemployed, they can transition immediately into new employment. They have a job. They can have their skills not just maintained, but upgraded. There can be, training and that sort of thing. But you remain employed through the business cycle. So spending to support this program automatically rises when the economy is weak, and it puts a floor under, the downward collapse because you're supporting people's incomes. So you shorten the duration of the recession, right? You truncate it because you're supporting incomes. People can return to jobs more quickly so they can transition back into old forms or other forms of employment. And as that happens, when the economy is recovering, spending on the program automatically shrinks. So this is an automatic stabilizer. It buffers the economy through the business cycle. The spending is targeted. You're not just mailing checks to everybody willy-nilly, say everybody have a check. This is a targeted counter-cyclical program that is a bottom-up way to stabilize the economy through the business cycle. And it's not meant to be something that you introduce just in an emergency, and then when you're through the emergency, you close the program down. It's meant to be a permanent new, right, program that is available in good times and in bad times. The number of people in the program will change as the economy goes through its inevitable boom-bust cycle.
So some practical example would be planting trees, caring for the elders, and things like that. Things that have an impact on community and on the planet as well. I mean, basically community-oriented kind of jobs.
Exactly. It could be community gardens. You could have community gardens so that you have fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, going to schools from the local community. You almost the sky is the limit in terms of what one's imagination, because the need is so much greater than what we can actually do with the people that we have. So there's no dearth of possibilities. It's just
going to the beginning of our conversation, what you are teaching is not applicable to Italy, as you made clear in the foreword, because practically we work on a foreign currency and we cannot print it at will. Okay, why this book should appeal to us as well? Which lesson can we get from modern monetary theory?
Well, look, I mean, I love Italy. I love coming to Italy. And in all the years that the euro has been in existence, it doesn't seem to me that it is yet obvious to everyone exactly what the source of the constraints and challenges are for the Italian government. Do people overwhelmingly understand that, there was this, what I call a design flaw in the Maastricht Treaty, that the consequences of giving up a sovereign currency transformed the nation state away from being a sovereign currency issuer with the capacity to do for the Italian people what the government chooses to do, to exercise its authority over its currency in ways that benefit the population? Do people really understand exactly what was sacrificed in the name of, joining a currency union that just had a flaw in the design that, well, I call it a flaw. I mean, we could debate whether it was an oversight or an intentional constraint being placed on governments, right? But the belief was, or at least the sales pitch was, it's not such a big deal to give up your fiscal capacity, your currency issuing capacity. All you really need is a credible, independent central bank, and things will be fine, right? The central bank will manage economic conditions in the Eurozone as a whole. And if there are, high levels of unemployment in parts of the Eurozone, then people, because, you're in you can move. You can move around and you can go to where the jobs are, and that somehow the arrangement itself was not going to pose, intractable problems over time. I don't have the impression that, most people in Europe understand really just how costly a decision that has been. Now, you said Italy can't do this. Well, look, you're on your way to a debt to GDP ratio of 170%. And last time I looked, the interest rate on 10-year Italian government bonds was below 1%. So this time, the currency issuer, which is the ECB, has your back. They have your back in a way that they did not initially last time, right? In 2010, when yields blew out. And that became an immediate unsustainable fiscal situation for many countries. Not this time. So the question is, if the ECB can do that, if they can backstop governments and effectively, I will say, effectively restore monetary sovereignty. You're being told, go run your deficits, do it, right? Do what you have to do, spend what you need to spend.
Yeah.
Your fiscal freedom has been restored. The question is, for how long?
Yes,
right?
This is the question. Listen, I'm afraid that our time is running up, but I have a couple of other questions. Can we continue after once you're done?
No, not immediately after, because hold on, I have such a packed day. But I had one thing move. I had something at 1:30 and we did it yesterday. So that means I don't have to do it today. So I have an 11 o'clock coming up now.
Yeah.
And then I have a 11:30. And then I have a 3 o'clock. So somewhere after maybe noon?
Yes.
12:30, 12 or 12:30 my time?
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yes. Okay.
So that would be an hour from now.
Yes, that would be perfect.
What time is it where you are?
I'm in Rome, so it's now it's 5:30.
Okay, so it's okay.
You're in Kansas, right? Yeah.
No, I'm in New York.
You're in New York. Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, I moved away from there years ago, but
okay, 6 hours. Yeah, Stony Brook. Yeah. Okay, 1 hour from now. So yeah, 1 hour from now. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very much. Sorry about that.
Thank you. Okay.
Thank you. We were talking about Italy and how the modern monetary theory can be a lesson also for us. And you were talking about the role of ECB, because this is the big if, of course. I mean, apparently the ECB now is behaving in an unprecedented way. I mean, buying national debt without worrying so much about that. But if it would last, it would be like a watered down de facto MMT. But the question is, will it last, according to you? I'm afraid not.
Listen, I do not know the answer to the question. I only can say that the stresses and strains that will be forced on many governments, and Italy in particular, right, will be so severe if support is withdrawn and the Italian government is told, you must now get your debt ratio back in line with Stability and Growth Pact, Maastricht Treaty limits, get to 60% from 170. We're not managing yields on your behalf any longer. So markets push yields, we don't know, right? 4%, 6%, 8%, who knows? It's unimaginable to me. Right? Because what are the options for government at that point? And how much will the people tolerate in terms of the kind of aggressive cuts that would likely be forced on governments if that were, I mean, we saw what happened in Greece. We saw what
Greece.
So we have been here before. We know what happens. And, you know, I would like very much to believe that the European Central Bank has come to understand its role in the arrangement, right, as the currency issuer, as the guarantor, as if this is truly going to be a union and you're going to behave as member states, as part of a collective, as part of a true union, then it cannot be this finger pointing of, you know, profligate this and we're bailing you. You can't, you know, we don't do that here in the US. We don't point, California does not point fingers at, you know, West Virginia and say, all of the dollars that we pay are being transferred to you. We don't do that to one another.
Yeah, but you're a federal state.
Exactly.
Why would not?
Yeah.
This is the problem.
So,
this is the problem. Yeah.
And so from the very beginning, you know, there were people who made the case that, you know, introducing a common currency and this monetary arrangement was the first step. Well, not the first step, right? Because this has process been underway for even decades before that. But that the currency union was an important step on the way to a fully fledged fiscal union. Now it's been 2 decades and it isn't clear that you're closer now than you were really 20 years ago to achieving that. And if that's not going to happen and you're not going to manage to get a unified budget together that is substantial enough and will allocate resources equitably enough to help member governments support their domestic economies, you know, there's a real risk in pushing governments too far, and the people then, you know, life becomes too harsh and intolerable, and people don't take to that very well. So
yeah, I definitely agree. You know, where is my problem here? It's a very political problem, because I definitely agree with what they're saying, but unfortunately, if we draw to the extreme consequences of what you're saying here in Italy as a ominous echo, because the parties that say, listen, the constraints of the euro, let's get out of euros, are bedfellows that you wouldn't want to have ever. You wouldn't want to go to dinner with that guys. I'm talking about Lega Nord and Movimento 5 Stelle, which is, of course, they are much better than Lega Nord, but still they simplify. I mean, your reasoning is perfectly articulated, of course, but if I have to find a way to say what you're saying.
Well, but see, I'm not saying my message. What I'm trying to convey is not that things are going to become desperate because the decision makers will withdraw support and treat the Italian government and others the way the Greeks were treated. I think that's why I tried to be somewhat hopeful and say, perhaps we've learned, right? And I think it is encouraging when Madame Christine Lagarde also talks of the important role that the ECB has to play in dealing with climate change. Yeah. Because you've got 19 countries who on their own, many of them cannot muster the resources to make critical investments in, green energy, energy sustainability, and transforming economies away from fossil fuels, and to get where we need to be in the time frame that we need to act. And she seems to be saying there's a role for the ECB to play in facilitating the financing of this transition to a green economy. Yeah. And that is encouraging for a number of reasons, least of which is the commitment to dealing with climate change itself, but also it again is that recognition that the currency issuer has a unique capacity here to step in and provide some financing. So if you can do it, I think, if you can do it for climate, you can do it for full employment. If you can do it for full employment, you can do it for other strategic investments in the economy and health and education and those sort of things. So
yes. No. What I was trying to say is that those parties I was referring to can, in very bad faith, can take your reasoning and say, she's saying, let's get out of the euro.
Did you, by the way, when you read the foreword, did you come away with that impression?
No, but there were two options in the foreword. Which one? The first one, the one I appreciate very much, was do another step, go towards a real union, or otherwise. The second option was more vague and it could lead the way to also getting out of the Eurozone.
I think that my hope was to convey that in my own thinking, the project is not really sustainable for the long term without that coming together, that commitment. You know, if you're going to maintain institutional arrangements that look much like they do now, you're not going to get a full fiscal unit. If that's not happening, if that transition isn't moving forward, then it's the only game in town is the currency issuer. And that is going to take, the person, the ECB is going to have to embrace, I would say. And they have, little by little, the ECB has moved in the direction of recognizing its unique role here. But, I told you, I think 10 years ago, I co-authored a piece with another MMT economist, Randy Ray, and he and I we published it in 2010, right in the middle of the debt crisis. And the name of the piece was, it's a Levy Economics Institute report or policy brief called, Can Euroland Survive? Can Euroland survive? And we answered in the affirmative, yes, it can. We did not take the pessimistic view that the project is doomed. We said, yes, it can if. And then we laid out some possible, right? And one idea was to have the ECB make a one-way transfer, a distribution to all member governments on an annual basis, not just in times of crisis, but do it every year, right? And do it on a per capita basis so that in fact, Germany would get the biggest distribution. So it would not be perceived as a bailout for bad behavior. Look, I give my kid, I don't mean to paternalize the relationship there, but we give our kids allowance because they can't generate enough financial resources to go out and buy a video game or, something that they might like, go to a movie or spend a little bit of money once in a while. So we make a distribution to them, and we're not currency issuers, but we have the capacity to give them a little bit of walking around cash every month, And so the reality is that in the Eurozone, recognizing that member governments are no longer currency issuers and that they will benefit from a top-up in the financial balances that they can generate domestically before having to turn to financial markets. And then if yields get too high, well, you can soften the blow to government finances by just committing a certain distribution annually to allow governments to maintain spending, for a full employment economy, strategic investments, and, mission-oriented domestic goals, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, of course, but you are perfectly aware that the German, to name a country, has got Schuld in their constitution. I mean, they translate with the same word debt and guilt, and of course this is a problem. This is a cultural problem which we'll find the way to overcome, because otherwise we are fucked, so to speak. But there was another point I wanted to provoke you with, even if it's outside your jurisdiction, but I'm convinced that you will know something about it, because Italy, for one, has an history of piling up debt even before the euros. I mean, we used to devaluate our currency in order to make things work and so on. Are you sure that putting the mint, the currency issuing into the hands of politicians rather than in the hands of the central bankers. Because in our history, in the history of my country, if I should choose from the politicians we used to have and the central bankers we used to have, I wouldn't be so sure. I mean, probably the bankers were better than our politicians. Do you see? Do you see a way out of this dichotomy? I mean, bankers and politicians.
Well, look, I mean, MMT is an economic framework for analyzing macroeconomies, right? And the fiscal capacities of governments that operate with different monetary systems. So it is not a prepackaged set of policies that you hand over to governments, say, do these things, implement MMT here. It doesn't work like that, right? You don't get to guard against an abuse of spending power, taxing power, and so forth. But what I did in subtitling the book, you know, for a people, building the people's economy. I don't know if that's the subtitle the Italian publisher went with, but that's the subtitle for, you know, the US edition, Modern Monetary Theory and the Birth of the People's Economy.
Yeah.
You know, this is, for me, you know, this book is not written for policymakers. It's written for the people. It's written to empower, you know, the reader so that, one, they don't fall prey to the deceptions that the politicians and the press and other, you know, media outlets bombard them with, the dangers and so forth. So let's empower people to know exactly what they can ask and expect of their governments. And the goal being that we get more democratic participation, right, with a better informed electorate. Nobody, I think, wants to sit back and watch their government abuse the power of the purse, abuse the, you know, fiscal capacities, channeling massive sums to lobbyists and special interest groups and cronies and cutting taxes for the wealthiest. But to some extent, you know, that happens here, for crying out. You know, you can't just say, well, Italy's past tells us, well, geez, America's present tells us that, you know, Congress will abuse that power. So having more oversight, and you know, one country that I do draw some inspiration from in the current moment is the New Zealand government.
Yeah.
And the prime minister there, who was just reelected in a landslide, right? Cross party, her party took more seats. They absolutely were rewarded, I think, by the people for, you know, carrying out. Now, I don't know everything about what she's done, and there may be problems and so forth. But as I understand what she has done there, what her government has done, is to make a commitment to the people. And to say, these are the 5 pillars that we are going to put resources in. When the government commits money to, you know, something, it is because it is helping us to achieve goals that we have set that feed into one of these 5 pillars, so that it's transparent and everybody understands that the government has real objectives in mind for the economy. They are stated clearly, everybody can hear them, see them, and you have accountability, because you get to find out over time whether you are delivering on those stated goals. You know, you could say the government wants to see poverty rates cut in half by the end of, you know, 4 years' time, or whatever the case may be, right? And the government wants to see the infrastructure in this country. We actually get a report card every 2 years with letter grades like kids get when they go to school, an A, an A minus, a D plus. America's infrastructure every 2 years gets an abysmal D plus, D. Once we had a C minus. I mean, it's just awful. So you could say something like, we're going to commit $2 or $3 trillion over the next 5 years to raise that grade to a passing grade of a B+ or higher in every category: ports, bridges, hospitals, schools, so forth. And you see what I'm saying? I mean,
Yeah, I do see.
But I do think you have to ask more of government than simply to, recognize MMT and the limits are not financial. And so you need a lot more
of course,
to achieve good outcomes.
Which lead us to, you've been advising Sanders, but he didn't win. Okay, I was following Sanders in the first campaign, by the way, for 1 week, and it was fun. But I thought that this time he could make it, because I follow it. I mean, I participated in a rally in San Francisco also this time, and I saw him. I mean, he had a bruise because he was under the shower. He had a big band-aid on. He was a good omen in a way. A bad omen, sorry. Anyway, he didn't win, while Biden has won. And you were cooperating with his team, I think, Not now, but while it was some time ago. The question is, do you think he will be sensitive to your recipe in some way?
Well, okay, so I served as one of 8 people appointed to the task force on the economy. There were a number of different task forces. I served on the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force on the economy. So we produced over a period of months during the summer policy recommendations and contributed to the drafting of the party platform. So that was our work. Now that work is finished, and so you're right. I'm not formally advising in any way. I'm not connected to the administration or incoming administration at this point. What do I think he can do? And I think it's important to say can do. We still don't know. We have 2 Senate races that are not finalized. We have runoffs, right? So in a very real way, the answer to your question depends very much on the outcome of those 2 runoff races. So let's assume, for argument's sake, that the Senate does not flip and that Mitch McConnell stays in charge and the Republicans have the Senate and the Democrats have the House, although they lost a number of seats in the House. So a weakened position, but still they have the majority. So what can he do? He wanted $2 trillion in climate spending, $2 trillion. And that seems to me unlikely. That's the reality with a Mitch McConnell led Senate. He wanted $700 billion for infrastructure and manufacturing. He wanted $775 billion for education and childcare, education and a care economy, investing in pre-K and all that sort of stuff. So close to $4 trillion. That was where he came down in these big categories. That will almost certainly not happen with a divided government. But the good news is that the ambition, the aspiration, the ambition was high. And I think that was a reflection of how seriously he takes the current economic situation. In other words, he did not say V-shaped recovery. We're going to bounce back very quickly from this. People who lost jobs because of the shutdown and the pandemic, they'll all find jobs. We don't have to think big. No. He said $2 trillion for climate and, manufacturing and infrastructure and education and so forth. So there are things that I think he can do via personnel and via executive order, executive actions. And my sense is that he will try to accomplish quite a lot if he has to, if he is forced to, through the executive levers. If the legislative branch is slowing things down and is not getting a relief package through quickly, what is he going to do?
Yeah.
So
the reason why I'm asking this, of course, it's very should be clear. I've also read an article in the New York Times which was quoting you on this. I mean, on the fact that apparently, also, I mean, having you in that task force is a good sign. I mean, it's a sign of someone who's not that sleepy Joe or moderate that we want to think about. I mean, maybe it could be even braver than Obama vis-a-vis of this economic policy, maybe.
Oh, I hope so. I mean, look, we got really one relief bill with President Obama, and that was with the Democrats having the House and the Senate in the first 2 years. They had both. We got one relief package, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the so-called Obama stimulus. That was $787 billion price tag at the time. And more than a third of it was tax cuts. Why? Because Democrats were trying to appeal to Republicans to get some votes from them, which they never got anyway in this effort, at bipartisanship. So they throw in all these tax cuts saying, come on, Republicans, you'll vote for it now. They wouldn't support it. But then really you didn't get other relief packages when it was clear the economy needed it. Now we got the 2.2 trillion CARES Act. Everybody understands that more is needed, Republicans as well. The differences are about what to put in the package, right? The Republicans don't want money for state and local governments. Democrats insist that that is absolutely critical, and I do as well. And I know that Vice President Biden understands that money to state and local governments is key. So he's prepared to come back. He would sign, I believe, a very substantial fiscal relief package without worrying himself about the impact on the deficit and that sort of thing. I think that in that way, this is very different from the concerns that the Obama administration had when they considered coming back with another package. It was, by then it was, oh, we have to worry about the deficit. And I think that's real progress that Vice President Biden is not there.
Yeah, apparently, because, 1 month ago or something, I've interviewed Emmanuel Saez from Berkeley about his book about taxes. And a thing that he said to me is that he had made a website in which you can compare the different fiscal policy of Bernie Sanders and the other candidates, of Elizabeth Warren and so on. And the fiscal policy of Biden wasn't that different from the Trump one vis-a-vis of, how to realign taxes, how to change the tax system. And so that was quite worrying, or disappointing to me. While now we have reason to believe that he understands the seriousness of the situation and he wouldn't be so obsessed with the debt. Okay.
I didn't catch what you meant when you said Biden's tax policy wouldn't be that much different from Trump, and that's worrying to you?
Yes, because I would have expected that a complete reversal of the tax cut that Trump has done vis-a-vis of the rich people, while accordingly to that simulation that Saez and Zuckman has done on their website, the tax policy that Biden has in mind was not so revolutionary like the one that Sanders and Warren came up with. In other words, it was much more, the change of Biden vis-a-vis of fiscal policy was much more moderate than the Sanders and Warren one.
Okay, so I want to be a little bit careful, but I will say this. The Vice President Biden has committed, because Democrats get attacked all the time for being the party that wants to raise your taxes. And Donald Trump said, oh God, if he wins, your taxes are going up.
Yeah.
So Biden said, no, people making less than $400,000 a year are not going to see their taxes go up at all. But he committed to raising taxes on people above that threshold.
Yes.
So if the concern is, inequality, and his commitment is that when we raise taxes, our target is on the people at the very top, then it seems to me entirely appropriate. Now, he's not proposing a wealth tax like Elizabeth Warren or Senator Sanders or something like that. But look, I think he is focused right now on the pandemic and the economic fallout. And that's a huge job. And he's coming in and he's not saying, let's fix everything all at once. Right? And by the way, he's not saying I have to find $1 of new revenue for every dollar I want to spend. So I need this wealth tax because that's where I'm going to get trillions of dollars to pay for all this. If you do that, what do you think the likelihood is of getting that through a Senate with a razor thin margin? Let's say they win those 2 seats in Georgia, and the Senate is split 50-50. You think 50 Democrats are going to vote for a wealth tax? I guarantee you they're not. So you know what I mean?
Last two questions. In the meanwhile, Mark Rubio is a fan of yours, apparently. How do you explain this bipartisan appeal?
Why do you say that he is?
Because I've read it somewhere. I mean, not necessarily yours, but MMT, which I conflate.
Yeah, I think that, okay, I just wanted to be a little careful not to.
I can be more specific in 1 second.
There are senators. Okay, but you're asking about a Republican senator. I did work.
It was in an article in Barron's, The Case for Permanent Wartime Economics.
Yeah. Okay, so I know that my colleague Randy Ray and maybe one other MMT economist, but for sure Randy, and I think one other, worked with some of Senator Rubio's staff, answered questions, tried to provide helpful feedback. It wasn't MMT per se, I wouldn't say. I think that where the MMT part came in is around the trade issue and understanding that, given that the US does run persistent trade deficits with the rest of the world, that this compels, in a sense, the federal government's budget in order to achieve a private sector surplus, that the government's budget has to be in deficit. So in other words, I think it was an opportunity for Randy to help Senator Rubio understand that, you can't go around railing against budget deficits, which are really critically important in a country that runs a trade deficit if you're trying to keep your private sector, healthy. Yeah.
I see. Okay. The very last one, which is a kind of provocation, of course, but still, I think it's fair to say, if it was, because this seems the best possible words. Medicare for all, jobs for all, you can pay for that because you can print money in order to pay for that, okay? Which the idea seen from Italy, but visiting often the US, the fact that you don't have Medicare for all, it's tantamount to, it's a heresy seen from here. It's something unbelievable, okay? But you could pay for that. You say you could pay for that because you could print money in order to pay for Medicare for all and all the stuff. So why didn't anyone thought about it before? You quote Abba Lerner, the functional finance school of thought, but how comes that it didn't became mainstream before? That's the final question.
Listen, during the campaign, during the primary, I was out there very, very, very early. And I was saying, my way of messaging Medicare for all was this: Medicare for all works like a tax cut, period. If if that had been made clear to the American people, if they had heard over and over and over and over again, we're essentially cutting your taxes. That's what Medicare for All will do for you. Yeah. Then all of this noise from opponents of Medicare for All about how much more it's going to cost, how much your taxes, you could deflect all of that. So why do I say that? Medicare for All is cheaper than what we do now. Even, and Senator Sanders used to cite that Mercatus study that came out, conservative. It was funded by the Koch brothers. The Koch brothers funded this study, and the Mercatus Center, academics there, produced this report saying Medicare for All will save. Now, it's been a couple of years, so I don't remember the exact numbers, but Medicare for All will save X trillion dollars, right? And whether you say annual or over many years, then the number gets very, very big, right? So the point is, we spend more than any other major country on earth on healthcare. We spend more than anyone. We spend about 18% of GDP, and we're on our way to 20%, which means $1 in every $5 that is spent in the US very soon will be spent on healthcare. $1 in $5.
Yeah.
In Germany, it's about 11%, right? In Canada, it's about half of what we spend in the US. Per capita, $10,000 per capita in the US. And Canada does it for about 6,000 or so. Yeah. So this question, how will you pay for it? Every time I got that question in a media press interview on TV, I said, first of all, we're already paying for it. We're paying more than anyone else in the world for healthcare. So the question really is, what are we going to do with all of the extra savings when we move to Medicare for All? Because we're going to have so much more money left in our pockets, which is Medicare for All works like a tax cut. Those premiums, those copays, those deductibles, all that out-of-pocket money that you pay for healthcare today, added up, the amount that you would pay under Medicare for All is a smaller number, which means you get to keep the difference. So it's just as if the government gave you a tax cut and you had more money every month to spend. Why didn't anybody message Medicare for All? I heard Senator Warren do it once that I remember, and she said, and I also had spoken with people on her team as well. And of course I'm tweeting and I'm encouraging candidates to talk about it this way. And she did, but you're right to notice that it didn't really catch fire. And you saw what happened. As soon as the policy came under pressure, came under fire, then all of the people who had lined up supporting it just started falling off, turning their back and saying, I don't know how to defend this anymore. I give up. I'm no longer for it. Except, of course, Senator Sanders. Yeah. It's just not that hard to message something that's, you get more. I used to say in the US, we have these commercials. Geico is an insurance company.
Warren Buffett.
The little gecko.
Yes, of course.
And they say, the Geico commercial comes on and you hear, you could save money by switching to Geico. That's their tagline. You could save money. And I thought, why don't you just message Medicare for All? You could save money by switching to Medicare for All. How much are you going to save? Not only do you save money, but you get better coverage. So Medicare for All is bumper to bumper coverage on a human being, right? From the time you're in the womb, the mother is cared for, the baby, all the way through life to your elder care, your mental health care, your dental care, your vision care. It wasn't just that you get Medicare for All that people have today. It's that you get the Medicare for All we have today expanded to include more. So seniors who were scared by commercials that said, Medicare for All, you're going to lose something. No, you gain, you get better than what you have. And it's cheaper. How could anyone be against more coverage, better coverage, more coverage, cheaper? Anybody should know, given the choice, which one do you want? More coverage, lower cost, less coverage, higher cost? but they couldn't figure out how to message it. And you know what happened? It was the tax part. It was the paying for it. And once you start saying, we're going to have a small tax here and it's going to, then everybody just, you know, gets heartburn because they hear tax. And so we need better messaging.
Definitely. Okay, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I really appreciate it. If I should have some minor clarification, can I send you an email and okay, just to make sure that everything is right. Okay. Thank you very much.
Ciao.
Best of luck.
Nice to talk to you. Good. All right. Bye bye.
Bye bye.